بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Moving on with our 20th lesson in introducing the Arabic language. Now, up until now, you have covered the qawl chart in its entirety essentially. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the qawl chart, but we've given you a good overview of the Arabic language. And in that overview, we covered the mufradat, which are single words. Then we covered um, murakkab structures, which break up into phrases and sentences. We covered both types of sentences. And in phrases, we covered 3 phrases. Now, obviously, there's a lot more, and this will come little bit, idnillah. But right now, as long as you've understood this much, it's more than enough. Moving forward, we're going to cover a few topics which are extremely important because they're very prevalent in the Arabic language. And these topics will also enhance our understanding of how grammar works. So today, for instance, we're going to be covering pronouns. Pronouns are isms, right? A pronoun, I've told you this before, that if you just say a noun is an ism, that's incorrect. Because if you just say an ism is a noun, that would be incorrect. If you restrict an ism to a noun, that would be incorrect because an ism is something that indicates a meaning in and of itself without being attached to a tense. That includes the noun, but because a pronoun is just a word that comes in place of a noun, it also includes that as well. Like for instance, instead of Muhammad, you say he. They both refer to the same person, so they're both asma. In English, pronouns are quite simple, right? You have he, they, she, and you, I, and we. So quite simple and easy. Arabic pronouns are quite detailed and I wouldn't say difficult, but there's quite a few of them. And there's about 14 pronouns, and these pronouns can take different forms. And because these pronouns can take different forms, you have to memorize these different forms. To give you an example of what I mean when I say they can take different forms, um, see, in English as well, we have pronouns taking different forms, but English is a bit different. Why is English different? In English, for instance, let's assume I use the pronoun he, okay? So I say he hit. He hit. Notice over here, he is the doer, is the subject. So that's the form it takes. But let's assume I switch this around and instead of saying he hit, I want him to be the one who's being hit. So for instance, I say Muhammad or Hamid, let's say Hamid hit him. Now notice over here, he and him is referring to the same person. He and him is referring to the same person, but you'll realize that it takes a different form. Him will take a different form. And if I say, for instance, instead of saying he's the doer or object, I say his book. Now he's the possessor. His book. You'll notice once again that he, which became him, now becomes his. So it takes a different form. So pronouns in the English language are actually a very good example of how positions and reflections work in the Arabic language. Right? Depending on the role that word is playing, it falls under the position, and that position is reflected. That's where the word changes, even though it's referring to the same entity. Okay, just like Dawudu, Dawuda, Dawud, Naam, and Muhammadun, Muhammadan, Muhammadin. The issue is in Arabic pronouns, they don't actually work in this way. In Arabic, and you'll have noticed this by now, bi'idhnillah, that certain times you have words that are falling under certain positions, but they don't change. You have words that are falling under certain positions, but they don't change. What do I mean by this? What I mean by this is, for instance, you have the word hada. Hada, up until now, you've seen it becoming mubtada. Hada means this. So you've seen hada kitabun. You've seen hada, for instance, ibn Ammar, or, akhul muhandis, whatever structures we've come across. You've seen hada becoming mubtada. And you learned in the rules of mubtada that mubtada and khabar both fall under the position of rafa'. They're roles that fall under the position of rafa' and they're reflected by a dhamma or dhammatain. Hada kitabun. Kitabun is the khabar. Over there, clearly, kitabun is in rafa', it's in the position of rafa'. It's being reflected by a dhamma. But when you look at hada is mubtada over here, and the rule is that mubtada is in the position of rafa'. But hada is always hada. Hada doesn't change. Let's assume you were to bring a harful jar. Assuming you were to bring a harful jar before hada. I say min hada. min means from. That's a harf al-jar. هذا still remains هذا. It doesn't change. Okay, let's assume you make هذا, even though the majur is a position, is a role that falls under the position of jar. Majur is a role that falls under the position of jar. Let's assume you were to say, for example, ضربت. ضربت means I hit. And obviously, I told you before that the object of a verb, the one that's being hit, is in the position of nasab. So if I say ضربت هذا, I hit this, i.e. this person. Notice how هذا over here is in the position of nasab. Why is it the position of nasab? It's the object. But you'll notice هذا does not change. Whether it's the mubtada in the position of rafa', whether it's the majur in the position of jar, whether it's the object in the position of nasab, هذا does not change. Now, هذا is not a pronoun. The reason I'm mentioning this is to show you something important. And that important aspect is this. You have certain isms that play a role. So هذا is mubtada, it's playing that role. And because it's playing that role, it's going to fall under the position of rafa'. هذا is in the position of rafa'. But it's simply not going to reflect its position. You'd expect there to be a dhamma at the end because dhamma is the reflection of the position, right? But you just won't see a dhamma at the end. It won't reflect its position. It's not going to reflect its position whatsoever. And to give you an example to understand this, think back to our field we made. We made a field of players. We said we have 4 positions. We have the position in net that we left for later on, right? Then we have the defensive position, which is rafa', right? We give that the color green. Then we have the midfielding position, which is nasab. We give that the color red. And then we have the final position, which is the offensive position, which is jar. Or we have 2 rows over there. So we have green. Okay, this is the defensive position. Over here, we had how many rows? We had 9 rows. We have 9 rows that fall under the defensive position. Then we have red, or which we refer to as the offensive position, i.e. nasab. We have 13 rows over here. And then finally, we have the position of jar, okay, which is the offensive position. Red is midfielding. The blue is the offensive position, which is jar. It has 2 rows. All right. At that time, I explained to you that depending on the role a player is playing, he falls under a position. If someone's playing a defensive role, one of the 9 defensive roles, he'll fall under the position of rafa'. Then we said that rafa' is expressed and reflected by a green shirt. Why did we say that? We said that because the students or the players who are playing in the defensive position, they're going to be wearing a green shirt. Then you have midfielders. Any role that falls under the midfielding position, they will fall under, or they'll be wearing a red shirt. That red shirt is a reflection of their position. And then finally, you have your offensive strikers. Okay. Any role that falls under the offensive position, they'll be wearing a blue shirt, and that blue shirt reflects their position. But sometimes, let's assume you're playing with your friends, and you run out of shirts. So you have a player who's, for instance, in the defensive position, let's assume. Okay. So the defensive position is the rafa based position, right? And he's supposed to be reflecting his position with a green shirt because that's how you reflect rafa. But he just doesn't happen to have any shirt. We don't have any green shirt we could give him. And he came wearing a black shirt. And we don't have a green shirt we can give him. Now, is he in the position of raf and defensive position? Yes, he is. He's still playing in that position. He's playing that role. He's still playing a role that falls under the defensive position. Does he have a reflection to convey that? No, he doesn't. But everyone knows he's in the position of defense. Let's just take another example. You have someone, once again, you're playing with your friends, and someone's in the midfielding position. But once again, we just run out of red shirts. So because we run out of red shirts, even though he's playing a role that's in the midfielding position, he can't reflect that position with a red shirt. The reason I'm mentioning this is because isms work in the same manner. There are certain isms that will play a role, and therefore they're going to fall under a position. And once they fall under a position, they're going to reflect that position. This is like kitabun. Kitabun is playing the role of mubtada. Afwan, khabar. It's playing the role of khabar over here. And because it's playing the role of khabar, it falls under the position of rafa'. And then it reflects that position. But then you'll have other isms like hada. You'll have other isms like hada. Whereas it's playing the role of mubtada. And if it's playing a defensive position, a role often in the defensive position is going to fall under rafa. Is going to fall under the position of rafa. But then when we come to the next step, is it reflecting it? There's no dhamma. So هذا just isn't capable of reflecting its position because we ran out of green shirts. Likewise with min هذا over there, هذا in that sentence in min هذا is playing the role of majur. And majur is a position that falls under jar. But is هذا reflecting its jar with a kasra? No, it's not. So it's still majur. But is there a kasra? No, there isn't. In ضربت هذا, it's still the object. The action is still being done upon this. I hit this, i.e. this person. So this is still the object. It's still in the position of nasab. But it can't reflect his position of nasab. And the example they gave for this is you run out of shirts for your players to reflect their positions. Alright? Pronouns in the Arabic language are the same. The way pronouns work in the Arabic language is exactly the same as هذا in the sense that pronouns, they don't actually reflect their positions. You'll have a pronoun, it's playing a certain role. It's becoming your mubtada, for instance. It's becoming your khabar. And therefore, it should be in rafa. But you're still saying huwa. You still have a fatha at the end, right? You're still saying, for instance, hiya. You're still saying nahnu, even if it's becoming, for instance, even if it's falling in the position of, and in different positions. You still read the pronoun as is. The reason for this is because pronouns are built. They're just built in a different way. Now, interestingly, what happens is sometimes you have different pronouns built for the rafa version and different pronouns built for the nasab version. This happens. You can have different pronouns built for different versions. That's fine. Okay? And that will come later, bi'idhnillah. Today, what we want to understand is just keep this in mind that pronouns don't actually reflect their position. Just like هذا and هذه. Again, هذا and هذه are not pronouns. هذا and هذه are called اسم ishara. Different category. It means this and that. Okay? But just like pronouns, هذا and هذه and pronouns, they don't actually reflect their position. And the example I gave you, this was a student or a player who's in the defensive position, or he's in the offensive position, or he's in the midfielding position, but he just doesn't have a shirt to reflect his position. Likewise, certain words are playing roles in the Arabic language. If it's playing a role, if it's playing the role of mubtada, like for instance, huwa means he, huwa Muhammadun, he is Muhammad. Now over here, or let's say huwa talibun, he is a student. Over here, huwa is playing the role of mubtada, clearly. That's the subject, he's being talked about. This is our mubtada. The information we're giving regarding him is that he is a student. Talibun is playing a role, it falls under a position, and it reflects that position with dhammatain. Huwa is playing a role, it's playing the role of mubtada. And if it's playing the role of mubtada, what did I tell you? It falls under the position of raf'. But is it reflecting that position? No, it's not. Simply because we ran out of, for instance, green shirts to give huwa. Alright? Now that we've understood this, the other thing you have to keep in mind, is extremely important, is that pronouns have different forms. They have different forms. If they come in different areas, we give them different forms. So in English, all pronouns are unattached. So you say, for instance, he, all right, they, and she, for instance. Just give three examples. You're never going to attach this pronoun to the upcoming word. There's always going to be a space between he and help. There's always going to be a space between they and sat. There's always going to be a space between she and left. You're always going to have a space in between. Notice, they're not attached. But Arabic's different. In Arabic, you can have pronouns that are attached, and you can also have pronouns that are not attached. Now, if a pronoun is attached, obviously it's either going to be attached to a verb, or a harf, or an ism. It can be attached to any of the three. So to give an example for this, let's look at our fi'l that we've already learned. We learned nasara, right? So that alif at the end, that over there is an attached pronoun. It's built in with the fi'l, but it's a pronoun at the end of the day. It means they two men. So in nasara, the alif is attached to nasara. That's actually two words. Nasara is one word, that's a fi'l. Alif is the fa'il. Okay. Let's take another example, an interesting example of a pronoun being attached to a verb. Nasartu. You already know what nasartu is. Nasartu means I helped, right? So that over there, nasartu is actually two words. Why is it two words? Because we're saying nasara is the fi'l, and tu, which means I, that's the pronoun, it's attached. You'll notice it is attached. That is the fa'il. But then we add on I add on another pronoun. I add on huma. So I take nasartu, and what do I add to it? I add huma. Huma means they two men. So I helped those two men. I helped them. Huma over here refers to two men. Right, we're going to translate this as them. I helped them. Interestingly, over here, you'll notice that nasara is a fi'l. We have one pronoun attached, which is the fa'il, directly to nasara. And then we also have another pronoun attached, huma. So you have two pronouns attached to a fi'l. This happens as well. Nasartu, I helped, huma, them. All right. Then let's take a look at an ism. Kitab is an ism. Kitab is an ism. It means book. So I say kitabuhuma. Notice I've attached kitab to the huma ism, the huma pronoun. This means their book, i.e., the book of those two men. Their book, the book of those two men. That's an example of a pronoun being attached to an ism. And then we have pronouns attached to huruf. Min is a harful jar. So we take min and we add it to huma, and hence we get min huma, from those two, from those two. Notice how over here the pronoun is attached to the harful jar. So a pronoun can be attached to a fi'l. Okay, if it's attached to a fi'l, it's either going to be from the pronouns that are built with the fi'l, like nasara, nasara, nasaru, like you actually learn them in the table because they're built into the fi'l, or it's added on extra, like nasartu huma. You don't learn huma in the table, right? You don't learn nasartu huma in the fi'l table. That's added on extra. In isms, you'll have pronouns attached to them, kitabuhuma, and even huruf, you can have pronouns attached to them. So we have this idea that pronouns are attached to words. And then on the other hand, just like English, you can also have pronouns that are not attached. I gave an example of this earlier, right? I said huwa talibun. Huwa over here, this is a pronoun. But you notice over here, it's not attached to anything. Huwa is not attached to anything. So that's an example of an unattached pronoun. It's not attached to anything. Today we're going to be covering a few forms. Okay, now you've already covered the first on the right, because on the right we have all the pronouns you've written in the table. So these are all attached pronouns, but they're attached to the fi'l. They're built in with the fi'l. Right? Nasara has a hidden huwa. Nasara has the alif. Nasaru has the waw. Nasarat has a hidden hiya. Nasarata has a ta alif. Nasarna has a na. Nasarta nasartu ma nasartum. Nasarti nasartu ma nasartunna. Nasartu has a tu. Nasarna has the na. These are all pronouns you've learned within the fi'l. So they're built in with the fi'l. You've already covered this. And at that point, you might not even realized. You might not have realized that there's different words. Nasara is one word, and the alif at the end is a different word. Even though we told you that the meaning of they two men is coming from the alif. So that pronoun at the end is actually a different word. Alright? It's built in with the fi'l. But then you also have other pronouns that are attached. These are also attached, but they're not built in with the fi'l. They can be added onto the fi'l. They can be added onto an ism. They can be added onto a harf. Okay? So if I add on a hu, for instance, to kitab, I have the word kitab, it's an ism, I add on a hu, it becomes kitabuhu. Kitabuhu. Add on a huma, it becomes kitabu huma. Add on a hum, it becomes kitabuhum. Alright? I have a ha over here. Notice the pronoun for female is hiya if it's unattached, but over here we have a ha. So if I'm referring to one feminine, single female, I would say kitabuha. Kitabuha. Once again, we have kitabuhuma, kitabuhunna. Now, up until now, I've only attached them. Naam. Up until now, I've only attached them to isms. I'm taking an ism and attaching it to a pronoun. Kitabuhuma and kitabuhunna. Naam. But we can also attach these very same isms, or these pronouns, afwan, to fi'ls. And we can add them on like we did in nasartuhuma. I can say nasartuhu, nasartuhuma, nasartuhum. Right? Nasartuha, I helped her. Nasartuhuma, I helped them too. Nasartuhunna, I helped them three. Okay? Notice you can add them on to the ending because they're attached pronouns. But you can also attach them to huruf. So let's take a half. Let's take min. Min means from. So I can say minka. I'm adding min to ka. Ka is in the place of ta. It means you. You one man. Minkuma. You two men. Or from you two men. Afwan. From you two men. Minkum. From you three plus men. Minki. From you one woman. Minkuma. From you two women. Minku. From you all women. And then you have ya. This is interesting. When you attach a pronoun to an ism, fi'l, or harf, right, it's going to come up as ya. So how do we do this? For instance, you say kitabi. You would say kitabi, which means my book. All right. Qalami, my pen. And then you have kitabuna, which means our pen. So these over here, the second category are attached pronouns. But like I said, these attached pronouns are not built in with the fi'l. The first category of attached pronouns, these guys are built in with the fi'l. So you're only going to find them with the fi'l because they're built in with the fi'l, right? Then you also have pronouns that are attached, but they're not built in with the fi'l. They can come with an ism. They can come after a fi'l, right? And they can come after a harf. So they're attached, but they're not built in. So there's a lot of flexibility in these pronouns. We'll be covering these soon, inshallah. The last category is pronouns that aren't attached. These are pronouns that are standalone, meaning they're not attached like huwa talibun. This category, you have to memorize. Okay, the other two categories we'll get the hang of one way or another, but this category must be memorized. Why must this category be memorized? Because, yani, you have to memorize it. And you'll notice over here the table, by the way, the table follows the same pattern as the verb table. So the first six, you'll notice the first six uh, rows over here, okay, are all ghaib, meaning they're third person. And then from them, the first three are masculine, مذكر, نعم, مذكر, and the next three are feminine, which is muannath. And then each one you have singular, dual, plural, singular, dual, plural. And then the next six are all going to be, right, mukhatab or hadar, which is second person, the ones who are being spoken to. All right. And then from them, the first three are masculine, second three are feminine. And then you have finally the mutakallim, which is the first person. So you'll notice over here that these pronouns, they follow the chart, follows the same order as the fi'al table. And that's why I told you, if you learn the fi'al chart, all other charts will become very easy. Now we're going to try memorizing this. Again, huwa means he, one man. Okay, when it's unattached. But if it's attached, it's not going to come as huwa. You're not going to, if it's attached, you're not going to say kitabu huwa. It's going to be made different. Instead of saying kitabu huwa, if it's attached, you're going to say kitabu hu. Keep this in mind. All right, if it's attached to an ism, fi'l, or harf, you're going to say kitabu hu, nasartu hu. All right, min hu. All right, huwa, huma, hum. Huwa, he, one man. Huma, they, two men. Hum, they, three plus men. Hiya, she, one female. Now you'll notice once again that when hiya is converted to the attached form, it's ha. I don't want you to say kitabu hiya. Kitabu, if it's attached, you would say kitabu ha. If it's coming first, hiya imra'atun, for instance. Hiya imra'atun. She is a woman. Now over here, because it's not attached to anything, it's going to come into the normal form of hiya. All right? If it's attached, we give it a different form, it becomes ha. Kitabu ha. Okay, hiya imra'atun. She is a female. نعم. هي هما هن. Once again, هو هما هم. هي هما هن. هو هما هم. هي هما هن. All right. Now the second person will always begin with the an, and then there'll be a ta at the end. And you'll notice interesting that ta is the exact same ta you came across in the fi'l, so it's easy to memorize. Anta, antuma, antum. You one man, you two men, you three plus men. Anta, antuma, antum. Anti, antuma, antunna. Anta, antuma, antum. Anti, antuma, antunna. Anta, antuma, antum, all masculine. Anti, antuma, antunna, all feminine. If it's attached, you're no longer going to say anta. If it's attached, you give it a different form. That form is kakumakum, kikumakunna. Kakumakum, kikuma, kunna. Minka, minkuma, minkum. Minki, minkuma, minkunna. If it's attached to an ism, kitabuka, kitabukuma, kitabukum. Kitabuki, kitabukuma, kitabukunna. So you'll notice once it's attached, the form changes. All right? Anta, antuma, antum becomes kakumakum if it's attached. And then finally, ana and nahnu. Ana means I, nahnu means we. We can add on this over here. I and we. Now you'll notice over here that depending on the way that word is being used, in English you translate it differently. Sometimes you say my, sometimes you say me, sometimes you say I, sometimes you say our, sometimes you say us, sometimes you say we, based on how that word is being used. And we'll touch upon this one, bi'idhnillah. All right? Now again, like I told you, I want you to memorize this last section. Huwa huma hum, hiya huma hunna. Anta antuma antum, anti antuma antunna, ana nahnu. Huwa huma hum, hiya huma hunna. Anta antuma antum, anti antuma antunna. Ana nahnu. I'm not sure if I'm going too fast. Huwa huma hum, hiya huma hunna, anta antuma antum, anti antuma antunna, ana nahnu. This needs to be memorized. So please have this memorized. It's quite easy now because you've already covered the fi'al madi. This should be easy to memorize. All right. Now that we've memorized this, the other two, I'm not going to make you memorize. The first one you've already memorized in the fi'al table, the alif at the end, the waw at the end, you've already memorized that. The second one, all you have to keep in mind is that if it's attached, then in the first form, huwa will turn to hu. In the fourth form, hiya will turn to ha. And then in the middle six, anta antuma antum will turn to kakumakum, kikumakunna. And finally, the last two will turn to ya and na. Okay? Just keep this in mind. And the more you practice, the more you get the hang of it. You can memorize it. The way you memorize it, if you want to memorize this is your choice. Just add on a word to the beginning. So add on kitab to the beginning and then memorize it with the word. Because you can't memorize it alone, right? The point is it's an attached pronoun. It's attached to something. So if it's attached to something, you have to memorize it with that something. So if you want to memorize the second table as well, you can do it. I don't mind. But the method would be to say to add on kitab in the beginning. So kitabuhu, kitabuhuma, kitabuhum. Kitabuha. Notice here turns into ha. Kitabuhuma, kitabuhunna. Kitabuka, kitabukuma, kitabukum. Kitabuki, kitabukuma, kitabukunna. Kitabi, kitabuna. Like, I'm not going to force you to memorize the second one. The first one you have to memorize. Okay? Because if you don't understand this, then you're going to come across a lot of words in the Arabic language you don't know what they mean. And pronouns are used like in every other page. In every other paragraph, you'll have pronouns. It's very difficult to write the Arabic language, or any language for that matter, without using pronouns. And because we have so many pronouns in the Arabic language, you have to memorize them. Especially this first table I've given you, huwa huma hum, hiya huma hunna, anta antuma antum, anti antuma antunna, ana, and finally, nahnu. Now, recap. I mentioned to you that pronouns in the Arabic language, even though they fall under roles and they fall under positions, they don't reflect them. They do not reflect them. So don't think huma is like only for the position of rafa, or like hiya is only for the position of like, or like ha, for instance, is only for the position of jar. They simply don't reflect their positions. Keep this in mind. Naam. All right. So they're just built in different ways. Because we know they're built in different ways, we can memorize these different forms and we'll understand these pronouns. But just a tip to keep in mind: if an ism is attached to if a pronoun afwan is attached to an ism, if a pronoun is attached to an ism, so you have, for instance, kitab, we have hu or huma or hum. Anytime you have a pronoun attached to an ism, then this will always make, listen carefully, this will always make a mudaf ilay combination. Anytime you have an ism attached to a pronoun, this will always make a mudaf ilay combination. So kitabuhu, his book. Notice he owns the book. All right. Kitabuhuma, their book. Kitabuhum, again, their book, multiple men. Kitabuha, her book. Kitabuhuma, they two females, their book. Kitabuhunna, their book, i.e. they three plus females. Kitabuka, your book. Notice how every time you have an ism attached to a pronoun, it's always going to make a mudaf ilay combination. And likewise, anytime you have any ism or any pronoun afwan attached to a harful jar. Whenever you have a harful jar attached to a pronoun, for instance, let's take min. We take min and we attach it with ha, right? Who, or for instance, you can take huma, any pronoun you want from the attached pronouns. It's always going to make harful jar, i.e. jar, and majur. It's always going to make jar majur. Now you'll notice min huma. Huma is in the role of majur. It's coming after harful jar. It's in the position of jar, but it's not reflecting its jar. Just like that player who's playing defense, he's in the role which falls under defense, but he doesn't have a green shirt to reflect it. Or he's in the midfielding position, but he doesn't have a red shirt to reflect it. Or he's in the offensive position, but he doesn't have a blue shirt to reflect it. Likewise, over here, we have jar majur. The who is in the role of majur. It falls under the position of jar. Is it reflecting it? No, it's not reflecting it. But whenever you mark these, if ever you see a harf al-jar followed by a pronoun, minhu, minhuma, minhum, right? Fihi, fihima, fihim. You have, for instance, ila, ilayhi, ilayhima, ilayhim. Anytime you have a pronoun followed by, a harf al-jar followed by a pronoun, just keep in mind that this will make a jar majur combination. It will make a jar majur combination. Now that we've understood this, let's take a look at durusul lugha. And like I said, this has to be memorized. Huwa, huma, hum needs to be memorized. If you want, you can memorize kitabuhu, kitabuhuma as well. But that's not necessary because you're going to practice kitabuhu, kitabuhuma. How are we going to practice kitabuhu, kitabuhuma? He brings you an example over here in Durusul Lugha. He says, تأمل ما يلي. Think of the following. Baytun means a house. When we attach it to the ya pronoun, again, the ya pronoun is for nam singular, masculine slash feminine, first person, all the way at the end. The ya pronoun, it corresponds to tu. I'm mentioning tu because you've already learned tu, right? In the fi'l, nasartu, when ya is attached onto an ism fi'l or harf, alright, it would be singular, masculine or feminine, first person. So bayti means my home or my house. Okay, baytuka means your home. Baytuhu means his home. And baytuha means her home. So bayti, notice that's an ism attached to a pronoun mudaf mudaf ilayh combination. Okay, and we know that ya refers to first person singular. What's the first person dual slash plural? Na. Like if you were to say, for instance, baytuna. Baytuna. Notice we added on the na at the end. Baytuka, and then over here underneath this, we can obviously add on baytuka, baytukuma, baytukum, because we've already memorized these. Remember the attached pronoun for the for the mukhatab second person, it turns into kakumakum. So anta antuma antum turns into kakumakum. Anti antuma antunna turns into kikumakun. Kunna when it's attached. Baytu ki, baytu kuma, and finally baytu kunna. All right. Baytuhu, we have baytuhu, baytuhuma, baytuhum. Baytuhu, baytuhuma, and baytuhum. And then baytuha, we also have baytuhuma and baytuhunna. All right. These are all the pronouns you've learned. The order is different, but it's the same pronouns. And again, they're attached over here. These are the attached versions. The non-attached versions, huwa, huma, hum, that needs to be memorized. Okay. I told you if they're attached to an ism, is going to make mudaf mudaf ilayh combination. So let's apply this. Let's learn this. Right? He says, connect these words. You have qalamun. Qalamun means pen. So you want to make a sentence. In the sentence, you're going to bring hada first. That's going to be our mubtada. Okay. And then our khabar will be a mudaf mudaf ilayh combination. We have our mubtada over here, hada. And then our khabar will be a mudaf mudaf ilayh combination. Hada qalami. This is what we're going to end up doing. Hada qalami. This is my pen. Hada qalamuka. This is your pen, i.e. you and man. Hada qalamuhu. This is his pen. Hada qalamuha. This is her pen. This is the same for kitabun. Kitabun means a book. Hada kitabun. This is a book. Hada kitabi. This is my book. Hada kitabuka. This is your book, i.e. you and man. If it's kuma, it's you two men. If it's kum, it's you three plus men. If it's ki, hada kitabuki, it's you one female. If it's kuma, it's you two females. If it's kunna, it's you three plus females. Hada kitabuhu, this is his book. Hada kitabuha, this is her book. Sarirun means bed. So, hada sariri, this is my bed. Hada sariruka, this is your bed. Hada sariruhu, this is his bed. Hada sariruha, this is her bed. Ismun means name. Hada ismi, this is my name. Hada ismuka, this is your name. Hada ismuhu, this is his name. Hada ismuha, this is her name. Very easy and very simple. Let's take a look at sayaratun, because sayara has a ta at the end, it's feminine. You'd say hadihi. If you said hada sayaratuk, it's incorrect. Why would hada sayaratuka be incorrect? Because look, sayara is being talked about, right? That's our khabar. He said that the khabar and the mubtada need to match in terms of gender. So you can't say hada sayaratuk. Even if you're talking to a male, you're talking to a man. The subject and the predicate of the sentence is the car. That's the subject. Car is the information. So car and this have to match in terms of gender in Arabic. Even if you're talking to a man, this is your car. You're saying to a man, this is your car. You still have to say hadihi sayyaratuka. This is your car. So you'd say over here, the first example, hadihi sayyarati. This is my car. Okay. Hadihi sayyaratuka. This is you, one man's car. If it's two men, hadihi sayyaratukuma. If it's three plus men, hadihi sayyaratukum. If it's one female, hadihi sayyaratuki. If it's two females, hadihi sayyaratukuma. If it's three plus females, hadihi sayyaratukunna. Alright? If it's they or he one man, third person, هذه سيارته, هذه سيارتهما, هذه سيارتهم. If it's females, هذه سيارتها. Notice the ha is in exchange for هي. When he is converted to an attached pronoun, it becomes ha. هذه سيارتها, هذه سيارتهما, هذه سيارتهن. Very easy and very simple. Just keep the table in mind. And you can even use this when you're applying this. I want everyone to go through these afterwards and try applying this yourself, inshallah. When you go through these afterwards, you don't need to do it from memory. I don't mind if you have the table printed out and you do it with the table to get a better understanding of it. That's fine. But the first table, huwa, huma, hum, that needs to be memorized. Okay, the second one you can practice until you get the hang of it. That's not an issue. The first table, however, needs to be memorized. Now we come across another example, the interesting example of adding on a harful jar. Adding on a harful jar to a pronoun. Now, up until now, you've covered 4 huruf jarra. You've covered min, you've covered ila, you've covered fi, and you've covered min, ila, fi, and ala. Today we're going to add on a 5th harful jar, and that 5th harful jar is the lam. So the lam is pronounced as li or la, okay? And it basically means for. Like something belongs to another person, it means for. Okay? If I say هذا لك, it means this is laka for you. هذا لي, this is for me, i.e. it belongs to me. Okay? هذا له, this is for him. So lam is a harful jar. Okay, to give you an example, if I was to say, for instance, هذا, this is, whatever this thing is, like a book, for instance, li hamidin, this is for Hamid. Now notice lam is a harful jar because we have a jar. The upcoming word Hamid is in the role of majur, reflected, which falls in the position of jar, which is reflected by kasra. Okay. Pronouns, like I mentioned to you, don't reflect. They don't reflect. They're just built differently. So li means for me, laka means for you, lahu means for him, and laha means for her. I'm not going to practice this. I just want to get you a glimpse of this. For practice, I want you to focus on this, the isms, adding an ism to a pronoun, and this will be sufficient, inshallah. Now let's actually apply this to a few sentences. هذه البنت طالبة. This student, or this daughter of one, is a student. Ismu, what pronoun would you use over here? You're referring to a female, single female. Over here, the pronoun you would use is ismuha, right? Because the pronoun that's being used for singular female is liha. Ismuha, her name is Zainabu. Okay, and then over here we have ismuha is mudaf mudaf ilayh, and our mudaf mudaf ilayh will become our mubtada, and then Zainabu will become our khabar. Okay, ismuha mudaf mudaf ilayh becomes mubtada, and Zainabu becomes our khabar. Okay, Muhammadun tabibun. Muhammad is a doctor. Wabnuhu, because Muhammad is masculine. Wabnuhu, and his son is muhandisun, a an engineer. Okay, let's assume instead of Muhammad we had multiple men, right? We had, for instance, or let's assume, for instance, we had Muhammadun wa Amina. Muhammad and Amina. Muhammadun wa Amina. Okay, let's assume they're married. Muhammadun wa Aminatu tabibani. They are doctors. Over here you would say wabnuhuma. You would say wabnuhuma. Okay. هذا الرجل تاجر كبير. This man is a big merchant. اسمه Abdullah. His name is Ahmad. His name is Abdullah. His name is Abdullah. اسمه Abdullah. Okay. And there's an example of this in the Quran. ومبشرا برسول يأتي من بعدي اسمه أحمد. He said Islam is sent to say that I am giving you that tidings, مبشرا برسول, of a messenger who is coming after me. يأتي من بعدي اسمه أحمد. His name is Ahmad. So you'll see over here, the ha pronoun is referring back to him, i.e. the messenger is going to come after Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, referring to Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So ismuhu, his name is Ahmad. That is our mubtada. And you'll notice the mubtada breaks up into mudaf. Okay, I told you every time you have an ism attached to a pronoun, it's going to be mudaf, mudaf ilayh. Okay, and Ahmad is our khabar. Okay, Aminatu fil ghurfati. Amin is in the room. Wa ummuha, and her mother is fil matbakhi, in the kitchen. عائشة طبيبة وأختها ممرضة, and her sister is a nurse. All right. And finally, we have our last sentence, which is interesting. This is an application of the fi'l rule we also learned. خرج محمد. Once you see خرج, you see a fi'l. خرج means to leave. So now start looking for the fi'l. This over here is our fi'l. Start looking for the fa'il of one. And we look ahead, we see that there's an ism that's ready to become fa'il. It's doing the action. It's coming after the fi'l. Therefore, you mark Muhammad as fa'il. خرج محمد. Muhammad exited. من الفصل, من الجار. الفصل is major. Okay. So فعل فاعل جار مجرور. وخرج معه زميله. زميل is the file. زميل means colleague or classmate, depending on context. Right? وخرج معه زميله. Now, notice over here, if you see خرج and you don't realize that زميل is becoming the file, you're going to assume there's a hidden huwa inside خرج, referring back to Muhammad. But that makes no sense, because that would mean Muhammad left from the classroom and he left. But you've already said he left. So over here, you have to determine just because there's not an ism coming directly after kharaja, ma'a means with, by the way, just because there's not an ism coming directly after kharaja that can become the fa'il, keep looking ahead. Because when you said that the fa'il comes after the fi'il, I didn't tell you it has to come immediately after the fi'il. I said that the rule is that the fa'il needs to come after the fi'il. But we didn't say it has to be the first word after the fi'il. To give you an easy example to understand this, if I say, فتح الباب محمد. Over here, who's the fa'il? The doer of the action. Who's opening the door? It's Muhammad. But you notice that the fa'il isn't coming directly after the fi'il. Because the rule is that the fa'il needs to come after the fi'il. I didn't say it has to come immediately after the fi'il. So just because you don't have an ism right after the fi'il that can't become fa'il doesn't mean you stop looking. Keep looking ahead. What if the fa'il comes later on? And when you look ahead, you realize that, oh, زميله over here is actually the fa'il of kharaja. So خرج محمد من الفصل. Muhammad left the classroom. And وخرج معه زميله. You're going to translate the doer first. In English, the doer comes first, right? وخرج معه زميله. And his classmate left معه with him. His classmate left with him. Okay. With this, we've covered pronouns in the Arabic language. And I'd request everyone to review this. And like I said, you have to memorize that first table. هو هما هم. هي هما هن. أنت أنتما أنتم. أنت أنتما أنتن. أنا نحن. With regards to the second table, you can just apply it till you get the hang of it. That's not an issue. If you want to memorize, add on the word kitab in the beginning. And just keep in mind that if you have an ism attached to a pronoun, it becomes a mudaf mudaf ilayh. If you have a harf jar attached to that pronoun, it becomes a jar majur. All right? And then the last column you've already learned. The last column you've already learned in your fi'ls. Nasara, nasara, nasaru. Over there, the alif is already built in. The waw is already built in, etc., etc. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.